Any electronics besides the phone?
Just a charger. It's in the side pocket.
Got it. I'm gonna take a quick look inside.
Sure.
Nothing sharp, no liquids over the limit. Looks good.
Appreciate it.
You're all set. Safe travels.
It was 7:30 on a quiet Wednesday morning at Phoenix Sky Harbor International Airport. The kind of morning where the security line moves slowly. Business travelers check their watches. And TSA officers might repeat the same motions they've done 1,000 times before. Shoes off. Laptops out. Bags on the belt. Nothing out of the ordinary. Until one word cut through the noise and froze the checkpoint in place. Terrorist. The voice came from a TSA supervisor standing at the X-ray monitor. Her eyes locked on a man waiting calmly beside the screening table. He didn't run. He didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. He was black. Mid-30s. Athletic. Wearing jeans. A hoodie. And tactical boots. With a backpack sitting open in front of him. Inside that backpack were not weapons. Not explosives. Not anything illegal. There were Arabic language flashcards. Laminated cards. Study notes. Training materials. But the moment those papers appeared, the tone changed. TSA officers moved closer. Airport security was called. Passengers stopped walking. Phones quietly lifted to record. In seconds, a routine screening turned into a high-alert detention. The word terrorist hung in the air. Heavy and final. The kind of accusation that follows you long after the moment ends. What no one at that checkpoint bothered to ask before escalating was the simplest question of all: who is this man? And why is he traveling? Because if they had paused for even 30 seconds, if they had made one phone call or checked one badge, they would have learned that the man being accused of terrorism was not a suspect at all. He was on his way to Washington. D.C. Under direct orders to brief the United States Congress on how to fight terrorists. The man standing at that checkpoint was Chief Petty Officer Daniel Thompson, 36 years old. Naval Special Warfare. SEAL Team 3. 16 years in uniform. 16 years of doing the jobs no one else volunteers for, and most people will never hear about. He had deployed 7 times to combat zones across Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, and East Africa, moving through places where the rules of normal life do not exist and mistakes cost lives. Daniel was not a support role, not an observer, not a desk officer. He was a direct action operator, a counterterrorism specialist who had spent his adult life hunting the very people TSA claimed to be protecting the country from. His record was written in medals. Most service members never see a Navy Cross for extraordinary heroism in combat. A Silver Star, 3 Bronze Stars with Valor, and a Purple Heart from shrapnel wounds taken under fire. He held top-secret security clearance with sensitive compartmented information access, meaning the federal government had investigated every corner of his life and judged him trustworthy enough to handle the nation's most sensitive secrets. Daniel Thompson was not just military. He was part of the small fraction of the U.S. Armed Forces trained to operate in darkness, to run toward gunfire when everyone else runs away. And yet, at that airport, none of that mattered. Because in that moment, he was not being seen as a Navy SEAL. He was being seen as a black man with Arabic materials. And to the people making the decision, that was enough to turn a decorated counterterrorism operator into a suspected terrorist. Daniel Thompson was not at the airport by choice. He was there because the call had come late, the way urgent military orders always do. Tuesday afternoon, his commanding officer at Naval Special Warfare Group 1 notified him of immediate tasking. He was to travel to Washington, D.C., without delay. The Senate Select Committee on Intelligence had requested a classified briefing on counterterrorism operations targeting ISIS remnants in Syria, and they wanted to hear directly from operators on the ground, not from slides or secondhand summaries. Daniel had led multiple missions in the previous months and was considered one of the most experienced voices they could put in that room. There was no time to wait for military transport. So he did what thousands of service members do every week. He booked a commercial flight, Phoenix to Reagan National, a last-minute reservation, paid under official military travel orders, departing early Wednesday morning. To Daniel, it was routine. Receive orders, pack, fly, brief, return. But to TSA's algorithmic view of risk, those same details told a different story. A last-minute booking, one-way travel, tactical gear, no uniform, combined with the wrong assumptions. Those ordinary facts began to look suspicious. The very urgency of his mission, the reason Congress needed him in Washington, would soon be used as part of the justification for treating him as a potential threat. At the security checkpoint, everything followed the familiar routine. Shoes off, belt off, electronics in a bin, backpack on the conveyor. Daniel stepped through the metal detector without incident and waited on the other side. Calm, patient, already mentally reviewing the briefing he would give the next morning. His backpack, however, did not emerge from the X-ray machine. It sat there as the TSA screener leaned closer to the monitor, studying the image longer than usual. A supervisor was called over. Karen Price. She had been with TSA for over a decade, trained to identify threats by patterns and indicators drilled into her since post 9/11. She glanced at the screen, then looked up at Daniel, then back at the screen again. The bag was pulled aside for secondary screening. Price opened it piece by piece, laying the contents out in full view. Clothes, toiletries, a sealed envelope containing military travel orders, which she opened despite Daniel calmly telling her they were official documents. Then she reached the language materials. Laminated flashcards printed with Arabic script. Study sheets with foreign phrases and translations. Price held them up and asked a single question that shifted the encounter from inspection to accusation. "Why do you have documents in Arabic?" Daniel answered without hesitation. They were language training materials. He studied Arabic for his work in counterterrorism. He was a Navy SEAL, but the explanation did not land. The sight of Arabic text in his bag carried more weight than the words coming out of his mouth. And in that moment, suspicion hardened into certainty. The search continued. And with every item removed from the backpack, the atmosphere grew heavier. Price found a folding knife. Compact, with a blade under 3 inches. The kind of tool Daniel carried every day for work and training. He immediately acknowledged it, explaining that he had just come from a training evolution and had forgotten to move it to his checked bag. It was a mistake, not a threat, and under different circumstances it would have been handled in minutes. Instead, the knife became confirmation. Price set it aside and kept digging, uncovering challenge coins from joint operations. Photos from deployments showing Daniel and his teammates in combat gear. Weapons visible in the background. She studied the images as if they were evidence, not memories of service. "Why do you have pictures with guns?" she asked. Daniel answered evenly. He was in the military. That was his job. He handed over his military ID, pointed out his rank, his active duty status, his clearance. He explained again that he was traveling under official orders to brief Congress. He offered phone numbers, names, verification. Price looked at the ID, then looked back at him. and dismissed it with a sentence that stunned everyone within earshot. Military IDs can be forged. In that moment, the interaction crossed a line. What had begun as a bag check became a detention, driven no longer by policy, but by disbelief that the man standing in front of her could possibly be who he said he was. Once the words were spoken, there was no stepping back. Price signaled for additional security, and within moments 2 airport police officers arrived, hands resting near their weapons, posture alert, already briefed that they were dealing with a possible terrorism-related incident. Daniel felt the shift immediately. This was no longer a misunderstanding that could be cleared up with a phone call. He did exactly what his training had taught him to do in volatile situations: remain calm, comply, and speak clearly. He identified himself again as Chief Petty Officer Daniel Thompson, United States Navy, Naval Special Warfare, traveling on official orders. He explained the Arabic materials, the gear, the photos, the knife. He asked them to verify his identity with his command. The officers listened, but procedure had taken over. "We need to investigate," they said. "Come with us." Daniel was escorted away from the checkpoint, past lines of travelers who watched in silence as a black man was led through the terminal by police. Some assumed guilt. Some pulled out their phones. None knew that the man being detained had spent most of his adult life protecting people just like them. In a small airport security office, the door closed behind him, and the reality set in. He was being treated not as a service member on orders, but as a potential threat, and the clock was now working against him. Inside the airport security office, time began to stretch in a way Daniel knew too well from other high-stakes environments. Only this time he had no control over the outcome. He sat at a plain table, hands visible, answering the same questions again and again. His name, his rank, his unit, why he was traveling, why he had Arabic materials. Each answer was clear, direct, and consistent. He showed his military ID again. He pointed to the sealed orders, now opened and spread across the table. He gave them his commanding officer's name and direct contact information, explaining that one phone call would resolve everything. But instead of calling, the process slowed. Airport police contacted TSA supervisors. TSA supervisors contacted DHS. DHS searched internal directories, unsure who to reach. The verification channels moved with institutional caution, not urgency. Meanwhile, Daniel's phone vibrated with alerts he couldn't act on. Boarding had begun. Then final boarding. He told them plainly that he was about to miss his flight to Washington, that Congress was expecting him the next morning. The response never changed. "We're following procedure. Ad no patruzecha. M." United Airlines Flight 1247 pushed back from the gate without Daniel Thompson on board, while the man scheduled to brief the Senate Intelligence Committee remained seated in a small room, detained by the very system he had spent 16 years defending. Nearly 90 minutes after the detention began, reality finally broke through the fog of procedure. Someone at DHS placed a call to Naval Special Warfare Command in Coronado, California. The phone rang in Commander James Mitchell's office, and within seconds the story unraveled. They explained that TSA and airport police had a man in custody claiming to be a Navy SEAL named Daniel Thompson, traveling on military orders. Mitchell didn't hesitate. His response was immediate and unmistakable. "You have Chief Thompson in custody," he said. "He is one of my operators. He is traveling under my orders to brief the Senate Intelligence Committee. Release him now." There was no uncertainty in his voice. No need for further confirmation. He instructed them to check their own systems, to look at the clearance records that already existed, to understand that the man they were detaining had been vetted more thoroughly than almost anyone in that building. Within minutes, the tone on the other end of the line shifted. At Zech Trezich Shichincha, M. The door to the security office opened. Daniel was told he was free to go. There was no apology, no acknowledgement of error, just a quiet release. As if 90 minutes of wrongful detention could simply be erased by opening a door and letting him walk back into the terminal. Daniel stepped back into the terminal carrying the same backpack that had triggered the detention. But nothing about the situation felt the same. His flight was gone. The briefing schedule was now in jeopardy. The knife he had acknowledged and explained was confiscated and logged. Despite being legal and incidental, his language materials had been examined, copied, and flagged. His name, for reasons no one would fully explain, had entered a system associated with enhanced security screening. These were not temporary inconveniences, they were digital marks that follow a person long after the moment ends. Daniel called his commanding officer and explained what had happened. Commander Mitchell's anger was controlled but unmistakable. He told Daniel he would be rebooked immediately, that the command would file a formal complaint, and that what occurred was unacceptable. A Navy SEAL with active clearance, traveling on official orders, should never have been detained on the basis of language materials and assumptions. As Daniel waited for the next flight, he stood among travelers who had no idea that the man quietly checking his phone had just been labeled a terrorism suspect by his own government. The cost of the detention was already clear. Time lost, trust damaged, and a mission made harder for no reason other than suspicion. Daniel arrived in Washington just before midnight, exhausted, running on adrenaline and discipline instead of sleep. He checked into a hotel, reviewed his notes one last time, and reported to Capitol Hill early the next morning. Exactly as ordered. The detention did not stop the mission, but it did not go unnoticed. Before the classified briefing began, the chair of the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence addressed the room. She informed the members that the operator they had requested had been detained the previous day by TSA as a terrorism suspect while traveling to brief them. The reaction was immediate and sharp. Senators who routinely speak about national security and counter-terrorism understood the gravity of what that meant. A Navy SEAL with top-secret clearance, vetted by the same government now detaining him, had been treated as a threat by an agency meant to protect the public. Daniel then delivered a 3-hour briefing on ISIS operations, leadership structures, and ground realities in Syria, answering detailed questions about strategy, effectiveness, and risk. When the session ended, the chair addressed him directly. She thanked him for his service and apologized on behalf of the federal government, stating plainly that what happened at that airport should never have occurred and would not be forgotten. Naval Special Warfare did not let the incident fade. A formal complaint was filed, demanding answers for why a SEAL with active top-secret clearance, traveling on official congressional orders, had been detained without cause. 6 weeks later, TSA responded with carefully chosen language. Screeners, they said, had followed established protocol. No policy violations were found. In other words, the system worked exactly as designed. That answer triggered the lawsuit. Civil rights attorney Marcus Webb took Daniel's case and forced the data into the open. TSA screening records from Phoenix Sky Harbor told a story no press release could hide. Passengers of color were pulled for secondary screening at dramatically higher rates. Last-minute bookings combined with tactical gear triggered far more detentions for black and brown travelers than for white ones. Military identification reduced screening for white service members and increased it for black service members. The same uniform meant trust on one body and suspicion on another. Trial testimony exposed the core failure verification was offered and refused. A 5-minute phone call could have ended the detention. But disbelief overruled common sense. The jury saw it clearly. What happened to Daniel Thompson was not a mistake. It was discrimination dressed up as security. After 19 days of testimony and 8 days of deliberation, the jury returned its verdict. Guilty on all counts. Unlawful detention. Racial discrimination. Violation of constitutional rights. The damages totaled $6.4 million. Split between compensation for Daniel Thompson and punitive damages meant to signal that what happened should never be allowed to happen again. But the outcome revealed a deeper truth. The money did not come from TSA leadership. It did not come from the supervisor who made the call. It came from taxpayers. Karen Price was reassigned to an administrative role. Never fired. Never disciplined in a way that matched the harm. And she later retired with a full federal pension. No nationwide policy changes followed. No mandate required immediate verification of military credentials. No system was created to track racial disparities in screening. Daniel returned to service. He still deploys. He still trains. He still carries Arabic flashcards because language is part of how he keeps Americans safe. But airports changed him. He arrives earlier now. Documents everything. Sometimes wears his uniform so no one can question who he is. 16 years of service and a Navy Cross could not protect him from being seen as a threat in his own country. Because, in the logic of security theater, appearance outweighs reality. And suspicion moves faster than truth. This is not just the story of one Navy SEAL. It is a warning about what happens when systems confuse profiling with protection, and how easily the people defending the country can become targets of the very security meant to keep it safe.